homeless individuals, but not in the scope and the scale in other westernized, Western, developed nations that you see in the United States. There are about 2 million homeless youth in the United States each year. So that's a count that was based on some data from the late 90s that did some work assessing that about 7% of teenagers have at least one night of homelessness. That number is woefully out of date, so I'll give you some more up-to-date numbers. So in Los Angeles and every major city in the United States, each year we do a one-day census. We call it a point-in-time count. And this last year in Los Angeles, we saw a fairly sizable uptick in homelessness. So there are now 57,000 people on the streets every night, and 6,000 of those are unaccompanied youth between the ages of 13 and 24, who are the young people that I've been working with for years. Now, I don't have time to necessarily go into all of the experiences of these homeless youth, but I want to share a few statistics with you just so you get a sense of what happens for a lot of these young people. So sometimes people will ask me, are these homeless youth, do they want to be there? And the answer is no. I've never met a homeless youth who wants to be homeless. These are young people who have experienced an enormous number of challenges in their lives. So for example, almost half of these young people have been in the foster care system, which means that they had some sort of report of abuse or neglect filed against their family, and then the state came in and took them out of those homes and placed them someplace else. About a third have been in the juvenile justice system, so prior to age 18 they were incarcerated. About 50% have been in jail or prison at some point as an adult. Very few of them are actually veterans of the US military. Lots of them have been pregnant or gotten someone pregnant. About a fifth of them have actually had a child, and almost 10% of the youth you see on the streets of LA are actively parenting. Now, two more issues that are important to raise about the experiences of these youth that aren't on this slide is that about 40% of these young people are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, and most of those young people have either been thrown out of home because of religious conservatism in their household, or they've run away from a community where they face a lot of stigma and discrimination, and they feel that living on the streets provides them with a better option, or at least running away from home is a better option. And then even though almost half of these young people have been in foster care, which means that they experienced abuse or neglect, about another 30 to 40% of these young people have also experienced abuse and neglect, but never to a point where there was state intervention, or at least it was never brought to the state's attention. So a lot of these young people have run away from or been thrown out of homes where there's an enormous amount of violence, whether that was through state intervention or their own experience of just running away or being thrown out. And one of the things that's really important to understand is that social networks are an enormous answer that these young people turn to in order to survive day to day. So because of the experiences of abuse and neglect from family, because of their negative experiences with juvenile justice and the foster care system, these young people are very distrustful of adults, which is not very surprising. And so they turn to one another as a source of strategies for survival, which could include things like, where to sleep that's safe tonight, where are there agencies that will provide you with good social services in a low a low barrier sort of fashion, and also this is how they also learn about sort of surviving on the streets day to day in terms of the underground economy and things like this. So as a social work scientist, what I'm really interested in doing is trying to understand these networks and leverage these networks in positive ways. And so I was trained as a sociologist originally, and I'm very much interested in people's social networks. So homeless youth became a great place to do this research, not just because I found a great sort of deal of affect for these young people, which I do. I mean, these are my people, to put it bluntly, but also because they're disengagement from family networks and their disengagement from schooling and their hyper engagement with one another provides an amazing opportunity as a network scientist to try to understand social networks. Forgive me if I stop and drink a cup of coffee a little bit every once in a while, because it's first thing in the morning here in LA. But then something really interesting happened. In about 2007, I started talking to young people about their social networks and how they were using them to survive on the streets. And they started talking to me about something that I hadn't thought about before, and that was technology. Now, the typical impression that I got from people back in 2007 when I was talking to them about homeless youth and their use of technology, the response I would get people would say, well, they're homeless. How can they possibly have technology? Because we had this sort of false sense, I think, here in the United States, which is probably shared in the UK, that, well, as early adopters of cell phone technology and adults, we had this image of some, banker with a cell phone that was the size of a brick held up against the side of his face. But what we forget is that cell phones for homeless youth actually are a whole lot more like cell phones in, say, someplace like rural India, where this is a resource that's a terribly important resource, and relative to a lot of other resources, it's relatively inexpensive. So when I was doing these interviews back in 2007 with youth, asking them about how their social networks were helping them to find sources of resilience and survival, they kept talking to me over and over and over again about these best friends from home that they were talking to every day, that was their source of survival. And being over the age of 30 and not very cool, I was completely mystified by how this was happening. And so I was asking these kids, well, what do you mean? What are you doing? And they say, MySpace, man. And I don't know if any of you remember MySpace, but MySpace was the precursor to Facebook, and was just, the user interface was horrible as an adult. It was all these flashing lights and things that didn't sync properly. But these young people loved this stuff. And the reason that they loved it was that it gave them the capacity to connect with not just one another, which they were able to do face to face, but it allowed them to connect out. It allowed them to connect back to the people from their home communities who were their sources of resilience. Now, when I say home communities, I don't mean to say that every young person in Los Angeles is someone who's from a wildly different part of the United States. But once you get embedded in street life, you really become disconnected from your home, even if your home is only a mile away. And so for these young people, social media became a way that they could stay connected to their friends, stay connected to family who weren't abusive or neglectful, and do it in a way such that they could present themselves in a positive light. Because, one of the things that I think we're all aware of in a Facebook universe is that what people post up on Facebook is the good things that happen to them primarily. It's, at least my Facebook feed is filled with my friends from high school and university who have pictures of their kids and when they go on vacation and such things. Well, for homeless youth also, it provided them the opportunity to present a self that was a more positive self than perhaps they could in their day-to-day interactions with one another on the streets. So I became fascinated by this and wanted to dig deeply into what the implications of this work were. So I published a number of papers, really basically between about 2010 and 2015 or so. I published, maybe like 15 different papers about social media use and how homeless youth are using it. And we found that when homeless youth were using social media to connect to friends from home and family, that this was a source of resilience for them with respect to their sexual risk-taking behaviors, with respect to their substance using behaviors, with respect to their mental health, with respect to their social service seeking. It was one good thing after another after another. And this data was based on data that I collected back in 2009, a couple of years after these conversations that I was describing that I had in 2007. Well, what I want to share with you today is some more recent data from a really large study that I conducted about 5 years ago. So this is after Facebook has really settled down, social media, although the platforms shift and move for young people, these data really give us a sense of how it is that homeless youth are accessing technology sort of after the advent of smartphones and after the advent of really, social media becoming this pervasive thing in the lives of adolescents. And so, although I don't have a whole lot of data about, say, Snapchat, for example, or the shift to Instagram, these data, I think, are really reflective of sort of social media use as a construct. And so what I did was I had a study of 1,000 homeless youth who I recruited from drop-in centers in Los Angeles. Now, drop-in centers are places where there are, it is not a shelter, it is a social service agency that provides food and clothing. Oftentimes there's shower facilities. There's almost always case managers and social workers who are available to work with these young people to help them to reach out to other social services like housing. Oftentimes there's programming at these agencies that will be for job placement, for education and training. And these are typically very low barrier spaces. So young people, if they're high, are allowed in. Young people could be actively sleeping on the streets. They're allowed in. Young people can usually bring their dogs with them. They have to leave them outside or in a sort of a kenneled area. But most of these agencies have space for those dogs. So these are spaces where you see the spectrum of young people who are experiencing unstable housing. So you'll have kids who are couch surfing, kids that are sleeping on the streets, kids who are in emergency shelters, even sometimes youth who have just barely gotten themselves into their own apartment but are still very much connected to street life will be there. And this is a study funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. And we actually surveyed 1,000 young people over the course of 2 years and did some extensive work on their social networking technology use. So I'm going to share with you some recent studies that really highlight kind of what's currently going on. So for those of you who are interested in this topic, I highly recommend that you look up the name Anamika Barman-Adhikari. She's a former student of mine, and she has really taken this line of research and developed it, even above and beyond what I initially did. And so this is work that she led using the study which I created. And first thing is, when was the last time these youth were on the internet? So you can see that these young people, a third of them said it was, earlier that day. Another 20% said it was the day, it was yesterday. And only 8% of these young people say that they don't use the internet at all. And that is very, very comparable to what you see in surveys of adolescents in the United States in general. I think what's different here, though, is that the access is a little bit less sort of constant, right? So, very few adolescents in the U.S. overall would say that it was more than a week ago that they were on the internet. The today and several times a day sorts of answers go far up. So these young people are using the internet, but not as frequently, perhaps, as youth who have more stable housing situations. Now, how do they get on the internet? Well, this is also probably not terribly surprising. So for about a third of them, it's through their cell phone. And then for the rest, it's through a laptop or a desktop computer, which means that they're usually accessing these computers, and this is from data that we have previously, through social service agencies or public libraries. And so again, what I want to point out is that these young people are very much connected, but they're not connected as easily as young people who have more stable housing situations. But the notion that a homeless youth doesn't have a cell phone or doesn't have internet access is ludicrous. I mean, for these young people, having those technologies is key, because think about it in your own life. If you didn't have a cell phone, how would you possibly get a call back from a potential employer? Well, the same is true for these young people. They need this. Yes?
Sorry. Yeah. Interrupt you. I was just wondering if you had slides, because we weren't able to see anything.
Oh my God, you're not seeing my slides?
No.
You're just seeing my talking? Oh
yeah.
my God.
I'm just watching your face, mate.
And so
oh my God. How awful.
At first I was wondering if this was like a dialogue.
Jesus. My apologies.
No, don't apologize.
How about now?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Sweet. So let's here. This is so. Oh my God! Hang on.
Don't worry. I thought you were opening up with maybe some digital warmth to our group.
Oh my God! I was trying to here. Let me show you. So can you see the slides now?
No, you again.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, not you. It's you again. Yeah.
Let me
Wait, don't say yeah until the slides come up.
slides.
No.
No. Okay. Hang on. I did warn you I'm a Luddite. It's ironic that I do all this work on technology and I have such trouble doing this. Okay, so I'm tapping screen share, and then I'm talking desktop. Start screen share.
Perfect.
Okay. Now let's see if the magic happens.
Perfect.
Can you see some slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, this is good news. Oh my God, I'm so sorry that you had to listen. Just sit there.
Don't worry. Eric, there's a bit of a delay.
No.
Guys, I think he's on it. There's a bit of a lag, so just we'll be patient with Eric. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Okay, I'm gonna put the microphone on mute again, okay?
Oh God, okay. Well, actually, I'm not hearing too much of the echo anymore.
It might come and go though, so I'll still mute.
Okay, because then you can warn me when I'm losing you all again. So jump on and interrupt me if things go wrong again, please. Okay, so let me show you a couple of cool things then. Okay, so this is a picture of me with one of the youth that I've been working with recently. This is a picture of one of the young people who I absolutely love the most in the world. Who's one of the peer leaders in the program that I'm going to get to at the very end of this talk, where we use artificial intelligence. This is the slide that I wanted to show you about some of the system involvement. So you can see the really high rates of foster care involvement, having been in prison, having been in the juvenile justice system, pregnancy. I mean, it's really just a whole host of issues. This is my slide about networks of young people that I worked with back in the day, and how they use help one another get through. This is again me a few years ago when I was like, what, technology? You're actually gonna use a phone? That's crazy, because I was an uncool adult like everybody else. And then this is the YouthNet study that I started to do work with 1,000 homeless youth. And so this is the slide that I wanted to show you about the last time that folks were on the internet. So you can see that there's a lot of use. It's just that it's not quite as intensive as you might expect if you were looking at housed adolescents. And likewise, this is a slide that shows us what device they're using to get online. And so you can see that there's this move towards cell phones. And one of the things that really reflects is that, in my experience in other data, it's about 2/3 of the young people at any given time have a cell phone, but only about half of those phones are actually ones that have a data plan attached to them. So a lot of these young people carry around either a smartphone that they use as a Wi-Fi device when they can get outside of like a Starbucks or outside of a social service agency where there's a Wi-Fi hotspot, or they are sometimes even wandering around with two phones, one that's a sort of a Wi-Fi device that can fit in their pocket, and the other is a pay-as-you-go phone, something cheap that's usually a flip phone that they can just get voice or text on. And then once they burn through the $40 worth of minutes that they've got on that thing, they discard it and get another one. The other thing to keep in mind is that adolescents break their phones all the time. I mean, this isn't uncommon for. I mean, if any of you have adolescent age kids, you know this, that they just wreck their phones constantly doing dumb things. And it's even more so the case with homeless youth because they're sleeping outside. And so, water damage from rain and sitting on it, on hard concrete and cracking it, these things happen all the time. I mean, I did a little focus group a few months ago and asked kids, how frequently they go through their phones. And most of the young people there, some of them were like, oh, I've had the same phone. Like a couple of them were saying, I've had the same phone for a year. But then a bunch of the other ones were saying, oh, I have a new phone like once a month, once every 3 months, because I just, can't keep it in good shape. So with respect to social media, which is what I'm particularly interested in here, again, you can see that, like most adolescents, the vast majority are using social media. It's about 80% are actively using social media of some kind or another. But what's different about these young people relative to adolescents who are more stably housed is that the number of times a day or week that they're able to be actively engaged in social media is just less. So you've only got about 20% that say several times a day. And if this were a group of housed adolescents, it would be like 60% are saying several times a day. Now, with respect to social networking websites and what they actually talk to their friends about, or text about, or tweet about, or message about, or post about, it's the common stuff that you'd expect from adolescents. I mean, these young people are young people, and that's the most important thing to remember about them. So, almost 60% of them say they talk about music. Almost 40% videos and other things, in YouTube, whatever the newest viral video is. But because they're homeless individuals, you also see that, a fifth of them are talking about being homeless and needing a place to stay. And you also see them talking about, other typical adolescent things like school and drama with family, partying, music, television. So I want to put this slide up to sort of essentially normalize the experience of these young people online. Part of what their engagement with social media is all about is engaging in normal adolescent stuff. Now, they also use social media to connect to this diversity of network ties that I started to talk about. So back in 2007, when the young people started telling me about why they were using this awful thing called MySpace, they're talking to me about friends from home and family members and things like this. And this continues to be a major reason why young people are online. So you can see here that there's a lot of young people who are talking to brothers, sisters, cousins, or other family members. It's almost 50%. But you also see that they're using this to connect to young people on the streets. But notice that only about 40% of them use it to connect to other young people on the streets of LA. So there's this interesting experience that we ran into recently, wherein we tried to actually collect network data on the population using an app that we had built that once you installed Facebook, we could actually connect people who were friends with one another on Facebook. And we did this with a pilot test of about 60 youth. And what we found was that there were only about 17 of the 60 youth who were connected to one another through Facebook, which reflects the slide that you see here. And yet when we were asking them, at the same time to talk about who they were talking to face, the numbers were more like it was, I believe it was all but 20% of them were connected to at least one other youth that were in this study that we were doing. So it's a way that these young people are connecting to one another on the streets, but it's primarily, it seems to be something which young people are using to connect to family members and to friends of theirs from home before they became homeless. So now, one of the things I'm really interested in is how this social media and the networking that these young people can do through social media impacts their service utilization. I mean, ultimately, I am a social work scientist and not a sociologist. And so while it's fascinating to just look at what sorts of technology use is going on, I really want to know how it is that we can leverage this technology use to make a difference in the lives of these young people. So the first thing I want to point out is the gap in service access for these young people. So remember when I described this data set to you that I said that we had collected it from drop-in centers in LA. So all of these young people have a certain amount of service access because they at least came into that drop-in center for at least the day that we were doing the survey. So what you see reflecting that engagement in those drop-in centers is that food and clothes are something which almost all of these young people are accessing social services for. But these other sorts of services, which are really important for long-term stability, so health services, shelter and housing services, therapy services, and job-seeking services, are used at much lower rates. And it's really, half or less of the population of youth who's accessing these drop-in centers are effectively tied into these other services. So what we're really interested in this study was trying to understand how connections that are being mediated through social media can really make a difference in linking people to these different sorts of social services. So one of the things that we wanted to look at was what percentage of youth report different sorts of social support from different sources. So here you can see we've got informational support in blue, emotional support in red, and instrumental support in green. So instrumental support is maybe the one that might be a little bit awkward to understand. The question was actually, who could you borrow $100 from? Emotional support was, who do you turn to when you need help and advice? And informational support is really, who can you turn to find out information about social services, really. It was very specific. And so what you see here is that essentially different sorts of people are good for different sorts of support. So not surprisingly, staff at social service agencies are people who are, across those three kinds of support. It's really support around social services and then emotional support. Street peers, it's really a lot of emotional support as well as some of this informational support, but not so much in terms of the financial support. Home-based peers and family, however, seem to be the folks who people are turning to more when it's time, when they need financial assistance, and less so for information about social services. Now, we ran some statistical models, and we found some really a couple of findings that are really important. And I won't show them to you graphically. I'll just share them with you here. So youth who could turn to a friend from home for advice were more likely to use therapy services. So this we thought was really great because we thought about, how could we leverage these positive connections with these friends from home around mental health treatment. But the thing that was perhaps most exciting to us was this idea that people who were getting emotional support from staff were more than twice as likely to use all of the different services that we had explored the gap in. So what this led us to think was, yes, social media is a really important tool for support and emotional support from friends from home and family. But really what we need to do is we really need to focus in on linking these young people to the relationships with staff, which are much more face-to-face relationships. And then how can we use technology to help get us to this space? So what I would really like to suggest is that social media and apps can help us get to this space. So I know that I have some organizations here in Los Angeles who are doing a lot more outreach through sort of their Facebook pages and their Twitter accounts to not only do advocacy work, but also to sort of advertise the services that they have. But I think perhaps the most exciting thing that I've seen are these apps that have started to be built around social service seeking. So here's one from Street Connect, which is from the San Francisco Bay Area. And then the WIN app is one that is from the Los Angeles area. My personal favorite, however, is the Big Berg app, which is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And what these apps are is essentially you could think of them as Yelp for homeless services for youth. So what it is it's a very simple graphical user interface that homeless youth can access on their phones and use it to try to find the services that they need. Now, what I like particularly about Big Berg, and the reason that I highlight it, is that they were very thoughtful about two things. First, that youth may not have a consistent platform. So instead of saying, well, we're going to build an Android app or a iPhone app. They thought what we really need to do is we need to build a web-based quote unquote app that looks good and works on every mobile device platform universally. And so whether you've got Windows or an Android or an iPhone operating system, this thing looks and works the same. So as you move from phone to phone, which these kids do, you don't have to learn a new thing. They didn't have to program a different app for each one. And the other thing that they did that was very clever, I think, was that they understood that their marketplace, so to speak, for this app is not just the youth, but the social service providers and even the police who work with these youth. And so what they did was they not only talked to youth as they were building up this app, but they talked to social service providers, they talked to police, they talked to teachers to try to find out what are the sorts of services not only that are available to young people, but also to try to work with them to understanding that we needed to make it simple and easy to use, but we needed it to be something that not only the young people themselves would be using, but the adults with whom they interact, who then want to help those youth, that they would also be able to use this to try to help the youth navigate this system. And I think that this sort of more holistic engagement with a community around this app is a really exciting thing. And then I guess the third thing that I think is exciting about the Big Berg app is that they've found that once they built this app, and this is something that's happened in the other communities as well, that getting it out into the hands of youth to use it has been a bit of a challenge because they're not a part of those street networks where the young people are telling one another how to get access to services. So it's kind of they've built this thing, but now how do they get it into the hands of the people who need it? So we've been working with them, my research team has been working with them recently around trying to develop a peer-led model for this. And so come this fall, they're actually going to start a program where they have a group of homeless youth who they are going to hire on as interns who are going to be, they're going to be taught how to use the app. They're going to be taught how to access Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi in different hotspots around the city, how to turn their phones into hotspots, how to create mesh networks, all kinds of cool stuff, and then go out into the community and share that knowledge with their friends. And that work is actually based on the work that I'm going to talk about now, which is my new work on artificial intelligence. So, excuse me, artificial intelligence, when I usually talk about this, people kind of scratch their heads and think, all right, Eric, you're in social work. Why are you talking about artificial intelligence? Because for most of us, artificial intelligence means this: the Terminator or other killer robots that are trying to, are going to destroy humanity. I'm a big fan of humans, so that's my new favorite AI going to take over the world thing. But we're not interested in that. So I've created this new center called the Center for Artificial Intelligence in Society, not about killer robots. Also not about sexy driverless cars, although if one of you can become friends with Elon Musk and get him to give me one, that would be awesome. What I'm more interested in is this. So artificial intelligence is actually in our daily lives all the time. So when you go and you type in something into Google search, so in this case, I started to type in the search phrase, what is artificial intelligence? By the time I got to the I in RT, it knew I was looking for what is artificial intelligence, and it pulled it up. It's doing this through massive data mining, machine learning algorithms. And those things are really cool, and we do a little bit of work with stuff like that. But what we really do work with in my center is stuff like Google Maps. So think about this. I mean, maybe the context would be, how do you get from Heathrow to your hotel? But in my case, I'm often thinking about, how do I get from LAX to USC campus, because I travel around all the time. And Los Angeles traffic is notorious, I think, at least around the United States, maybe if not around the world, as being this awful thing. So, in order to get a mere 11 miles, it's going to take you, 40 minutes. I mean, it never takes 40 minutes. This is only because I did it in like the middle of the afternoon when I downloaded this thing before traffic starts up. So the idea behind these sorts of apps and the artificial intelligence that drives them is that what they're doing is that they're taking information about traffic that has been recorded historically, and they're mining this for patterns of what's going on. They're also updating it in real time with what's happening in traffic right now. And they're looking across sort of this network of traffic and trying to understand, based on what's happened in the past and based on what's happening right now, and iteratively what's happening right now, what is the one decision, the one path that it's going to send you on in order to get you from LAX to USC campus right now, today. And so this is the sort of thing that we're really interested in. And I'm going to allow my cheesy videos to show you these algorithms and graphics and to show you the youth that we worked with. But what I want to point out is that I want you to think about the social network that we used as an input into this as sort of the traffic network. And so what we're trying to do in this study, and I'll turn it over to the videos in just a second here, is we're trying to do HIV prevention for homeless youth. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to leverage these social networks that are so important for these homeless youth, which is their sources of survival. But we also understand that these networks are incredibly complicated. They are subject to change very, very quickly. So friendships break and are made very quickly. New young people enter the streets of LA every day. Young people are arrested or find a stable place to live, so they exit the network. And the networks are large, and even specific relationships may fracture over time. And no matter what we do when we're out there trying to collect this network data, there's always a source of error, in such that, you know, we can ask these young people who their friends are, we can try to collect their information through Facebook, but no matter what we use, we're always going to be missing some of these relationships, in part because they move and change so fast. So with that, Becky, if you don't mind bringing back I'm gonna see. I guess I'm back. Turning off my screen share. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tolerating my gaffes. You have my cheesy Hollywood videos ready to go?
We do, Eric. So what I'm going to do is, if you don't mind, can you mute your end, and then I will do. I'll start the videos now. I'll also mute, and then we'll come back for a discussion panel. Okay.
Hi.
Okay, Eric, videos are all done.
Excellent.
So, Eric, would you mind to take a few questions from the audience now?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. Let's open up.
Yeah. Can you hear me over there?
Yes, again.
Oh, hi. Fantastic work. I totally, absolutely love what you've been able to do. I've worked with the homeless, and I've actually made it. This will be my last career. I've just turned 15, and everyone in there is going to be amazed. But I've actually made up my mind that my last career will be working with the homeless. It's what I want to do. It's where I see vulnerable people being exploited by a system. But one of the things that I love about what you've done is you've taken something that we thought of in a very small scale. What we used to do was provide, I used to work with a service that provided a hot meal service.
Mm-hmm.
What we decided we could do when we had such a captive audience there was bring people in that provided other services that they could use, whether that be a GP, drug and alcohol services, etc. One of the things I always wanted to do though was to bring in a couple of laptops, put them at a desk so people could use that and get in contact with their parents, get in contact with their friends, their families, their loved ones, and make some connections back to the social life that they had before they ended up on the street. And then hopefully that would give them a little bit more impetus to go on and do other things to improve their standard of living, their life on the street, and hopefully progress to the stage where they're off the street. But what you've been able to do, I'm really interested in seeing some more results of this healer AI. In general, I'm a geek. I come from a geeky background myself. But when I look at IT in relation to homelessness issues and mental health issues, actually most of it scares me, but this doesn't. Most of it scares me for the reasons of the data, who it belongs to, how it can be manipulated, who would get access to it, what happens when the cloud breaks down and things like that. But this one, actually, no. I see more benefits than I do see, faults and things that could go wrong. Except there are still some things. What happens when it does go wrong? A little while ago in London, we had, or I say London, in England, we had a hack where our National Health Service went down because of a ransomware attack.
Oh God.
I see some real benefits in this system, and it's something I would love to introduce to Becky knows what I'm talking about. There are so many people there that are waiting for something like this to happen, and it's not just where the AIDS awareness that you used it for. I think it could go so far afield. Yeah, I'd love to use this if you allow me to.
Actually, well,
Yeah, well, we're happy to share.
Can I just jump in? And so that was Lloyd speaking. And if there is any opportunity, I'm sure London would love to try and replicate your work and try and set up some sort of funding arrangement to see what we can do. I don't know if that's a possibility.
I would be more than happy to explore it. I think we're very interested in having this not just be something that we have, but something which is shared. I mean, that's the dream. I mean, so right now we just started this summer this large, nearly 1,000 youth trial that we're going to be doing to try to really establish not just the promise of this, but yes, this is an effective tool. But if people are interested in working with it, we're happy to work with it. And in fact, the training that we developed that is for the peer leaders is built in a modular way, so that if you don't want to do it around HIV awareness, but you wanted to do it, say, around increasing technology access, for example, like the Big Berg people want to do, you can just keep the leadership components of it and then plug in other things which you want the young people to be messaging around. And my expectation is that it's going to also still have these unexpected, well, now expected secondary effects, which is that really giving these young people an opportunity to step up and do something positive in their communities makes a big difference in terms of their lives, because it's been so long since somebody gave them a chance to do something positive. And the AI algorithms are really just about trying to understand how to reach that community of young people, or even of adults, I suppose, most effectively. So it's really not about mining their Facebook profiles and things like this. It's really about how are folks in a community connected to one another, and how can we make sure that we reach everyone in a community, and kind of find, within these smaller sort of social groups, the particular people that are important in those social groups, not just sort of one or two or five people who are deeply attached to, say, the social service provider, and kind of show up and hang out by the front desk all day or something like that.
Do you have any more questions?
What,
Yeah.
what population area are you covering? I'm sort of a bit confused about the coverage area that you're working with thus far. And maybe
Oh.
I'm
So right now, what we're doing is we're looking at homeless youth who are in Los Angeles. And within Los Angeles, there are two neighborhoods where there are high concentrations of homeless youth, and where there are also homeless youth services that have kind of landed in those neighborhoods because of the concentration of youth that live in those neighborhoods. So one is Hollywood, which usually people think of like Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt when they think about Hollywood, but Hollywood is actually kind of a working class neighborhood that has a long history of sort of punk rock and things like this that made it so that this is a neighborhood where kids congregate. And the other is Venice Beach, which is another sort of, again, I guess has the history of more like the 60s and sort of, hippies and such things. But these are the sort of magnets for kids. And so social services have popped up there. So when we go, for example, you saw the, Blue and Cody talking. We went to a drop-in center that is about a 10-minute walk from Venice Beach. And this social service center that's a 10-minute walk from Venice Beach is where the couple hundred kids that are actively homeless on any night that are living in Venice are congregated. And so they will come to this drop-in center during the day to get something to eat. And so we are able to invite them to be a part of our intervention when they come into the drop-in center. And so what we did in the pilot study was we went there for like 2 days and just recruited the first 60 youth who wanted to be a part of the study, and then looked at the network connections that those young people had. And so when we're talking about the coverage, what we were really talking about was who showed up, to the drop-in center, so it basically is like, who are the kids that are actively hanging out on the beach this week? And then we got a small group of them, found out how they were interconnected with one another, and then we're able to pick these different peer leaders from these different cliques. And so what you had was like one group of kids that were primarily like African-American kids that like to play basketball in this, in this spot on the beach. There was another group of like white kids that were skater kids that would hang out another part of the beach. There was another group of kids that were camping actually on the beach with tents and things like this. There was another group of kids that were a little bit less connected to any of those groups, but were really sort of long time, had been on the streets forever, and would just kind of come to this drop-in center for sort of maintenance. And so those are sort of like the sort of different cliques of kids that we saw when sort of the algorithm took this messy network where there's these interconnections and kind of pulled it out into these different groups of kids, and then picked kids across these different cliques to try to bring them into to be seen. So that's kind of what we're talking about by coverage. So when we're talking about doing a larger scale study with 1,000 youth, what we're really trying to do over the next 2 years is to go to Hollywood and go to Venice for a long enough period of time that we're really engaging kind of everybody who's actively there for the month or so that we would be doing the recruiting, and really get kind of for a moment in time that whole population as the people that we're trying to cover, and then we're going to follow them for about 3 months so that we can see what kind of impact we have on them through this intervention. But the reality of street life in Los Angeles is that, 6 months from now, most of those, there's going to be this churn, and and at least in Hollywood, half of those kids will have moved on and been replaced by another group, and in Venice Beach, it's even more. There's even more flux, so it's going to be, like only like 10–15% of those kids will be still around in 6 months. So you really have to kind of jump in, move fast, which is the other reason that the algorithm is a really cool thing, because essentially it can let you know what's happening right now, who to reach out to right now to make an impact in the short term, knowing that if you do it again 6 months later, you're really going to have to do it again. And collecting this network data is a little bit of a challenge, and so it's something that we're working on with my computer science colleagues, sort of how to collect a minimum amount of social network data so that you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to understand just exactly how this population is connected. So we're working on some things where we're going to randomly sample 10% of the population and find out what their network connections are to one another, and trying to see how much, how well can we do with a much smaller chunk of this. So we're still fiddling about with it.
Can I ask you one thing, Eric?
Sure.
It's about the last thing you mentioned, that it seems that these groups, they move about quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, your artificial intelligence system is trying to identify the network as well as the peer leader within that network. But that is changing a lot all the time. So what a person that has been identified as a peer leader today, it may not be there tomorrow. So how do you deal with this thing? I mean, we see some of this. I've seen people working with similar kind of models with refugee populations, and they have a similar kind of sort of difficulty.
I think part of the answer to that is the time frame that you want to work in, right? So we're really thinking about HIV prevention as something that needs to be done. The recommendations, for at least from the U.S., Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, say that people in high-risk populations like homeless youth, where there's a prevalence of almost 10%, these people should be getting tested for HIV every 3 to 6 months. And we know that these young people, there's about a third of them, or even as up to half of them, who haven't been tested in the last 6 months. So what we're really trying to do is make some short-term impact in terms of getting people back into engaged with testing. But we don't expect that people who are good peer leaders today are necessarily going to be good peer leaders 6 months from now. So, for example, that guy, there's this kid named David who shows up in a couple of the videos. He was a great pick for a peer leader. He did this great work, but then as a result of his engagement with us, and this actually happened to Blue as well, this was the first thing that started him on a path towards stability. And so then he started engaging more intensively with the agencies, got into housing programs, they both got jobs, they both got off the streets. So even though they pop back in every once in a while to check in at this agency, they're not connected to everybody in the way that they used to be. So in a sense, we by identifying them at the moment in time and giving them this opportunity, we actually made them no longer good peer leaders, but we wanted them to do something that was quick, right? We wanted them to get their peers at that moment thinking about HIV testing, thinking about using condoms, and to start to move the needle on that. We weren't necessarily thinking about them as like long-term leaders. I mean, it's not like we're trying to identify, say, who's going to make a good politician in this group, who's going to be kind of like the long-term agent for change as like a social movement. It's more in this moment in time, given this flux in this environment, who can we pick, knowing that A, it's going to shift naturally, but also B, our involvement shifts it a little bit as well too. So I mean, I'm aware of this problem that you're raising, but I think my long-winded answer is we're trying to make short-term moves in behavior that hopefully will have long-lasting impacts for the folks in this population, but we're not worried about them not being good peer leaders, say 6 months from now. The idea would be, if you were to implement this system in an agency over time, you would want to be, every like 3 or 4 months, you'd want to be reassessing who's in your system, who's the new set of peer leaders that ought to be done. And because of the shift and churn in the system, you're probably going to be identifying new people every 3 to 6 months, which is great because you probably want to, from kind of a social justice perspective, share the wealth. You don't want it to always be blue. Every 6 months gets to be a peer leader over and over and over again. You want it to, move from young person to young person and give more of these young people an opportunity. So that's kind of my vision for how it would go over time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Excuse me, I've had a bit of a cold.
Any comments? Well, I think that's about it, Becky. And thank you so much.
Thanks for your attention. I know it's a little awkward to do this over Skype, and several thousand miles, but it's great to still be able to be a part of this meeting. I was really excited when Becky invited me several months ago.
Enjoy your coffee.
Indeed. It's first thing in the morning here. I mean, it's 8:30 now, so it's less first thing in the morning than it was when I first woke up. But so.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we have a panel discussion now? Yeah, I don't know if you'd like to have a panel discussion after your questions have been answered, but Eric, I don't know if you've got extra time or.
Sure.
I'm interested actually. I'm thinking about. Oh, I don't know what you're doing now.
I just thought,
still thinking.
for each of the sessions, we've had a general panel discussion. So with Jennifer speaking for okay, so just to open it up to both speakers. So Jeff, please continue.
No, I was just thinking, like, some of the things that I do are like borough-wide, borough-specific, and then some are like wider scale, like London-specific. And so I was just thinking about how this algorithm thing could be used to empower like mental health champions within London. I'm the co-chair of the steering group for London Thrive. And that's really about creating a social movement and appetite to learn about mental health and how to be more healthy, to lead happier, more fulfilled lives. And I see that as something that is about utilizing peer leadership for that kind of learning and dialogue and whatever. And the thing now for me is like, oh, okay, so how do you really pinpoint the peer leaders that will keep, the momentum going, but access the more people? Because often I think that the system doesn't find the right people. It has a lot of great intentions a lot of the time, but it doesn't connect with the right people, and it doesn't even create necessarily the right solutions because it's not asking the right people who, you know what I mean, to be involved. Yeah. That's like co-production kind of like element. But I'm curious about how that algorithm can be utilized here. That's what I'm on at the moment, really.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think sometimes, so I did a version of this about 6 years ago before I got involved with these computer scientists that do this AI algorithmic thinking. And I think what people in social service sector often do, which is we sort of picked people that we thought would be good for this, and we sort of base it on these, I don't know, intuitions that we have somehow, right? And one of the things that happened with this algorithm was that consistently, so I showed you this picture of Jacob at the beginning. He had the tattoo on his face and the long hair. This is a classic example of a kid who would be completely overlooked by the typical system, right? He shows up stoned every day, kind of keeps to himself, doesn't interact with the staff. So no one, when they're thinking about a leadership program is going to say, let's grab this guy, right? But the algorithm doesn't care about what we as adults think about him. It only cares about how he's connected to his community. And it turned out that he was one of these people who had a key set of relationships to a key group of these like kids who are tenting out on the beach, right? And so when it picked him, I went to the social service agency to try to look for him because we were going to have this training on Friday morning at 9 a.m., right? I've been at the social service agency all week, haven't seen him. It's finally Wednesday afternoon. I'm starting to freak out about where am I going to find this guy. So I decided to go out on the beaches of Venice to look for him. So I hike over, the 15-minute walk to the beaches. I'm walking up and down the beaches trying to look for him. I finally find him with this group of his buddies. They're literally passing a joint back and forth. He's so high, his eyes are practically closed, right? He's like super, super high. So I walk up to him, I'm like, hey, Jake, you remember me? He's like, yeah. I'm like, so remember there's that AI algorithm that I told you about that picks people to be peer leaders? Oh, yeah. It picked you. Oh, sweet. So there's going to be this training. It's going to be day after tomorrow, 9 a.m., at the agency, mile up the hill. You good for that? Oh, yeah, dude, I'll be there. And so, of course, typical, I'm a social work researcher. I've been working in social work forever, working with homeless youth forever. I think of myself as being not biased against these folks, but I'm still thinking in my head, stoner kid's not going to show up. I show up at 8:15 with like all my gear, ready to go, lugging it out of my car, and there's Jake sitting in front of the gate on his skateboard, cup of coffee in his hand, stone cold sober, and he's like, "Hey, dude, can I help you get your stuff out of your car and get set up?" Totally blew my mind. And this happened to me repeatedly, that it was somebody who either the agency looked at me like a kind of confused dog, looked like that kid, or I would look at the algorithm and be like, oh God, not that kid, and consistently they rose to the challenge. And it was just that we as adults don't always see through the veneer of homelessness, even if we've been working in the field for years and years and years. And so there's all this discussion about how like technology can create unintended negative consequences, but every once in a while, technology can actually, do some things which are maybe even unexpected positive things. So I think what you're suggesting, that it's getting to the right people and asking them the right questions, this sort of thing can be very helpful. So, the challenge then is figuring out, how do you know how people are connected to one another? Is it going to be through their Twitter accounts, their Facebook accounts? Are you going to just do, kind of like I did, old fashioned, who do you talk to on the streets kind of thing? But once you kind of get a handle on how you look at how people are connected, then this algorithm can tell you not who you think might be good people to work with, but who the community itself sees as important people.
Yeah, you really made me wonder, if what you're doing is actually, is the algorithm picking up leaders, or is the algorithm picking up people who can deliver a certain job?
No, go on.
Yeah. Because you said, that if the main target, and this is where I got confused, it is that you get as many of these homeless youth tested for HIV as possible. So in that case, I see that there is a task to be delivered, and then you have to choose the right person to do that. And I see the leader as someone who will do something, way beyond that. In a way, it's interesting, because this morning I was telling people about what we do in low and middle income countries, and the main strategy is what we call task shifting. And it's not very different from what you're doing here with the homeless people. We select people, whatever resources that are available in low-income countries, and we ask them, we train them, we supervise, we support them, and we try that they can deliver a certain task.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is that we've done similar things. We haven't used an algorithm, but essentially what we do is that we look for people who have certain features that are good at listening, good at talking, good at problem solving, relate well with other people in our community. And those are the people we select as the talkers, the people, the therapists, the people who will be delivering the service. which is not very different from what you're doing with your algorithm. So to some extent, I'm a little bit confused with the algorithm. Is it picking up something more than just a person who will deliver a particular task, or not?
Well, you raise an interesting question. I mean, in a sense, what the algorithm is doing is it is picking a group of people who, as a collective, as a team, essentially will be able to have reach that would sort of maximize the amount of reach you have across the entire community. And so at times, it may pick people who are exactly the sort of people that you're describing, that have these good listening skills, good people skills, because those people are very important. At times, however, it may pick people who are parts of friendship groups and may not have quite such an obvious set of good people skills, but who, by the nature of them being in a friendship group and being a part of that social space, must have some, I mean, in order to be somebody who other people talk about as being somebody that they talk to and who's their friend, you have to have some sort of social skills. I mean, especially when you're talking about really marginalized groups like homeless youth. I mean, there are homeless youth within the homeless youth community who are isolated from even other homeless youth because their social skills are so, sort of negatively impacted by either mental health issues or substance abuse issues or, cognitive impairments that are a result of sort of, physical abuse. I mean, which you see a lot of times. And so there's some of these kids that, we'll see on the streets that really aren't friends with much of anyone, and the algorithm's going to miss them, and we would miss, and we would skip over them as possible peer leaders too, for the sorts of attributes that you're talking about as well. I mean, I think the difference between the thing that the algorithm does versus what you're describing is that it's only thinking about the interconnections between that one person and the other people that they're connected to, and trying to find a set of people that essentially give you the ability to have coverage. So it may skip out on the ideal sort of worker in terms of like their social skills and opt for somebody who's just a little bit more popular for some reason. So we got some people who the agencies thought of, oh yeah, we would have intuitively picked this, but then every once in a while it got you Jacob, who really wasn't the sort of person that we would have thought about, but he was the right guy because he was connected, and that we actually, by reaching out to him and saying this algorithm thinks you're important, we gave him an opportunity to become one of those people, but we would have otherwise overlooked him. And that's the thing that I think is really potentially powerful about this, is that it gets us past just this sort of, there's almost always within a community a set of people who you're describing that are sort of obvious good candidates, and the algorithm usually pulls a chunk of them. Like this kid David I was describing to you at one point, he has a little bit of attention deficit disorder, but he's pretty much got really good social skills. Everybody talks to him. He's a good communicator. He doesn't always listen the best, but I mean, he's a teenager, right? No teenager really listens that well. And so he was one of the folks who would be sort of, well, probably we would have picked him anyway. But so it gets both, which is interesting, I think.
So is it right then in saying that essentially the algorithm doesn't discriminate, it doesn't pigeonhole, it doesn't paint everybody with the same brush, and indeed it actually gives you, it says, okay, this person uses drugs, this person uses alcohol, but actually he does have those other traits that we're looking for in a peer leader to be able to do that role and do that role well. And would that also, because I guess it sounded like he was a little surprised earlier on that, yeah, there's this guy that likes getting high, sitting down, having a joint with his mates and whatever. It sounded like he was surprised that he turned up the next day because you thought he might have been out smoking a joint. But indeed, having that kind of prospect of being a peer leader enabled him to kind of get over that joint for the afternoon, go and do something useful as a peer leader. And it sounded like you was a bit surprised that that actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I sort of paint the picture as if like I'm shocked that somebody who smokes marijuana could actually, you know, do something productive, right? Like I'm not that square, right? But I mean, the idea is, you know, this is this guy who yeah, well, let's not get into that. But this is a guy who, you know, most every time that I ever see him at the agency, he was high. I mean, I had to go track him down on the beach, and he was high there too. And I'm thinking, okay, he's gonna show up and he's gonna be high, and he's not gonna be that engaged in this. But he really thought of, oh my God, this is an opportunity for me to do something, and he really, you know, rose to the challenge. And you know, it's and you're right, you make a good point. I mean, part of what made him a good peer leader was that he was this cool kid who was a part of this group of kids that were partying out on the beach. And once we got him engaged in thinking about sexual health as something that he wanted to be, he could be promoting in his community, he didn't stop being the cool guy who you'd go and, like, you know, smoke a joint with out on the beach with, but he then also became a guy who would say, oh, hey, you know, have you guys thought about, you know, whether or not, you know, have you thought about HIV? Do you know that 10% of homeless youth out on the beaches here have HIV? You know, this is where you can go get free testing. This is, you know, where you can get condoms, and all the sorts of messages that we wanted him to share that he started sharing. So, but yeah, I mean, I think the algorithm sees through the veneer, right? Like, it's easy, I think, sometimes as adults to start to think, oh, well, that guy might not be easy to work with because he's even going to show up and be sober, because I haven't seen him sober in the last 2 weeks, you know? But, you know? But also, algorithms sometimes have a lot of discrimination built into them. So I don't want to oversell algorithms as being somehow. So, you know, there's some work that's been done recently in the U.S. looking at assigning bail bonds, so letting people out of jail before pre-trial, and they've been designing algorithms, and some of these algorithms turn out to be horribly racist. So basically, like, if you're a black person, you essentially have no chance of getting released pre-trial or something like this. And it's partly because the machine learning that's trying to generate these predictions, trying to generate the decisions, is based on essentially a fairly racist court system. And so if you have data which is biased, machine learning will learn biased results. So part of why this was unbiased was that we didn't enter into it things like whether you use alcohol and what our perceptions of you. All we wanted to do was look at how are you connected, and which of those youth are the important connectors. And so it's always this, you know, with computers, it's always this garbage in, garbage out sort of situation. So if you're putting something in to the system that can be potentially not so biased, you're good. But, you know, so be cautious of algorithms. Not all algorithms are good.
Can I ask a question? What has it got to do with anything of the, I don't know what's the word, intervention the peer leader have to do? Are you expecting that, like, you give them training, I suppose you give the matched control some training, and then you contact the peer by social media, or do they have to go and give a talk, or what exactly is to ask them to do that leading to the results?
So what exactly is the? I like the way he crawled under the desk there. That was awesome. So you're asking how did we make this comparison? How are we looking at this?
Exactly. What exactly the peer leader have to do? You pick them up through. I'm wondering, like, do you pick them up through how many followers on Twitter, or then peers? Are they going to do it online, or are they going to find the message?
So I think I understand the question. There's a little bit of a connection issue. So I just want to clarify. Are you asking how they deliver the messages? Is it online or face-to-face? Or are you asking about how we did the control group and what they were doing?
I would assume the control has the same training and asked to do the same thing, but like,
it is.
Peer leader, how do they deliver the message to the peers about HIV awareness?
Typically face-to-face. So it's typically face-to-face. we had a couple of youth who, so a bunch of these young people travel around the West Coast fairly actively. So they kind of go from Los Angeles up to Seattle and kind of back and forth like this. And so we had some young people who, during the course of the 3 months that we followed them, moved away. And so they would continue to engage with their friends face to face that they were traveling with, and then they would also communicate through Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that with other folks. But the bulk of the work was done face to face, you know, right there, kind of hanging out on the beach. I mean, we discouraged young people from doing a lot of what we would think of as street outreach that we as social service providers do. I mean, we didn't want them to go out and approach strangers. We wanted them to really communicate with their friends. And so they did work face to face with their peers, and they did work and then they did work online with their peers, but most of it was face to face.
Eric, have you ever thought about, once you've got those peers, have you ever thought about expanding the work that you do with them beyond the AIDS awareness side?
Yeah, you know, the agency that Allison Hurst, the director who was talking about the work there, the Englishwoman, she actually, her agency started what they call the quote-unquote SPY Squad, so their Safe Place for Youth, SPY. So the SPY Squad is now a internship program that is peer leaders doing other outreach work around social services. And they started this after we started this HIV prevention program, in part because I think what we had done, and in fact, 4 or 5 of their first youth that they enrolled in this internship program were former HIV advocates. So it's something which I think is really great to do above and beyond just HIV. I think for me, I'm more interested in its potential to be used to leverage the power of social networks to do positive things, more so than HIV specific.
Great. Cheers.
Just before you came in, I kind of wanted to talk about the social media system to help young people. I wonder if you, from what you've heard, Jennifer, if there's something here that you think may be of use for your system.
Yeah, I was thinking actually, we, as part of our volunteering program, we recruit team leaders to lead across all roles. And it did make me think, because we have a social network in existence already, whether some kind of algorithm like this could be really useful for us to see who are the natural people who are most connected on our app, who have the most influence and power. And I imagine there would be different people to the ones that step forward to do our team leader training. So I'd be really interested in wondering if we could apply it to an online network in that way, and the difference that would make across our community.
I'd be happy to share it.
Yeah, so
other people involved.
Yeah, so we have 3 volunteering groups.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the
3 different types.
yeah, and our buddies are normally people who are quite vocal on the platform, and you see a lot of them. But there are people behind the scenes who are perhaps very supportive that you don't notice so much. And it's hard in such a large network to make sure you're capturing everybody, you're aware of everybody. So I think something like that could be really valuable.
Because the project is kind of sort of similar to the peer leader that they have been mentioned here, or not?
Yeah, I think our team leaders are very similar. The role of a team leader is to kind of be that support and engaging figure for our volunteers, and then the role of volunteers is to do that for the community, so it almost trickles down. But our peer supporters, yeah, are very much about building people up and giving them that extra helping hand and passing on information and support. So
Yeah.
The incredible thing is that all this thing boils down to social networks. You know, this is how human beings, when we were created. You know, this is how this is to work.
I do think with like social media and stuff like that, we've got to be careful that we don't leave anybody behind, because there are some that haven't got that access to the internet, haven't got the mobile devices that they need to be able to. So we need to make sure that we're getting swept along this wave of like new apps and wearable gadgets that can measure your heart rate and whatever. We don't need the people behind that can't afford those things. While I was in the other group, everybody kept mentioning Fitbit. I'm thinking, well, actually, the people Fitbit, the health thing, I'm thinking, actually, the people that I care about, for me, you know, that part of society that I want to reach, they can't afford that. Never. And in actual fact, because of the advent of spice, the cannabis derivative, because of the advent of spice, we've actually got a problem with them actually keeping hold of the cheapest mobile devices, because they can get rid of that and get a joint, a little bag of spice. Before they would keep that little device because they couldn't sell it and go out there and buy a bag of heroin or buy a bit of crack cocaine. But now they can go out and buy spice, and spice is what they're actually using to stop smoking heroin or to stop smoking crack. They're buying spice because it lasts them longer, it gets them higher. So we're actually having problems with them keeping hold of the device. Whereas before 4 or 5 of them in a group of 6 might have a cheap mobile device, now only one of them has it, because only one needs to make that call to go to the shop and pick it up. So we've got a problem in that sense, you know, 3 or 4 pounds can get somebody high for a couple of days. You know, whereas before it used to be 15, 20 pounds or they might need to buy it. Which,
whatever you do, it will have consequences. We know that. Not only in science, you know, in everything we do, some of them we can predict, some unpredictable.
I think something that we all have to remember, you know, we have these conferences about how incredible technology is, and it is. But I mean, one of the things that I'm always saying to people is like, we have to still switch off. That we can't live our entire lives online, and the importance of retaining that offline connection and having face-to-face conversations and not just getting sucked into this online world on your phone. We're constantly telling our users, you've been on here all day, you need to go and take a walk.
funny enough, that was another conversation we had next door. It was how would information technology help with, you know, therapy for people with mental health issues. But one of the things that just came to mind is that I get on a bus and it frustrates me so much when I see a parent walk on a bus, push the buggy up against the window, so the kid's looking out the window, and then they sit there. Throughout the whole journey, it could be 2 stops or 50 stops. They will not talk to their kids. And I've always talked to my kids. I've identified things as they're passing out the window, a tree, a bus, the colour of the bus, or whatever it is. But now everybody's like this these days. So it occurred to me that when we was having this conversation talking about using information technology as a way of intervening and providing therapy for people, it occurred to me that, hold on a minute, maybe they actually just want to sit down with a therapist and have somebody to talk to, you know, but they're going to go in and see a therapist, and what's he going to do? Yeah, so, no, actually they just want to talk to you a minute there. They want a bit of interaction, human interaction that they might not even be getting at home when they're sitting around the dinner table because someone's sitting there going, you know, so we really have to be careful how we kind of say to somebody, yeah, use the internet to do this or use an app to do that, because that gadget, that device has encroached so much on society. It's eviscerated families, you know, it's just like torn them apart. The kids go off, they come in from home, whatever she was cooking that she thinks she's still got a whole plate full of, now she turns around and is like, where they gone? They just run up the stairs with your kids who's run down, go into her bedroom and go, and she won't move from there until she wants to go back in the fridge again. I find my daughter in one of 2 places, on her bed, sitting down with her phone, or her head in the fridge, and her little legs hanging out. I just know exactly where to find her. When she's indoors, there's only 2 places I will find her. It's either in the fridge or her head is. You know, she's in her bedroom.
I guess on that note, you know,
We've covered everything, haven't we? Eating habits of children.
We're human beings and we're talking in theory. What could be more important than that? Well, thank you all very much for being on this wonderful day. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I don't know if you want to say something.
No, I just think it's a session.
Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Wonderful, putting this together.
Well, thank you.
Well, there's that.